Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sidney Jackson. I'm the Assistant Dean for Global Enrollment and Recruitment at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, also known as SAIS. And I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's special lecture, which is delivered by one of our distinguished professors, Dr. Jessica Fanzo. We call tonight's program a taster lecture because we want to give you a small sampling of the thought leadership you'd be exposed to as a student here at SAIS. We also want to give you an opportunity to engage our professor with questions after her lecture. As you may already know, SAIS is the premier graduate school for the study of international relations, but I'd like to take a moment to highlight 4 reasons why you should consider us as your first choice school. First, you can become an expert through experiential learning opportunities that include study treks, practicum projects, crisis simulations, and staff rides that provide hands-on application of theory to real-world problems. Second, you can build your network by joining a Johns Hopkins alumni network totaling more than 222,000 individuals, including 20,000 influential SAIS graduates. Third, you can advance your career because you'll have over 200 opportunities to connect with future employers through events, rewarding internships, and employer visits. And finally, you can learn from the best. You can engage our global faculty who are renowned for their scholarship and influence in academia. There's no question that they're unmatched in terms of their teaching, their research, and their involvement in the public square. And we could have no better example of that than Dr. Jessica Fanzo, who'll deliver her lecture tonight entitled, "Can Fixing Dinner Fix the Planet?" Some background on Dr. Fanzo. She's the Bloomberg Distinguished Associate Professor of Global Food and Agricultural Policy and Ethics at SAIS, the Berman Institute of Bioethics, and the Department of International Health of Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University. She also serves as a director of the Global Food Ethics and Policy Program at Johns Hopkins and plays key advisory roles in Hopkins' Alliance for a Healthier World on the food security and nutrition theme, as well as the Bloomberg American Health Initiative on obesity and food systems. She's currently serving as the co-chair for the Global Nutrition Report and is the team leader for the high-level panel of experts for food systems and nutrition for the UN Committee on Food Security. She also serves on the Lancet Commission on Healthy Diets for Sustainable Food Systems. Dr. Fanzo has worked as an advisor, a consultant, researcher, and reviewer for various organizations and governments, including DFAT, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition, USAID, the UN Food World Program, the World Bank, and the World Health Organization. With 15 years of research and program experience working in the field in sub-Saharan Africa, South and East Asia, her area of expertise focuses on multi-sectoral and system approaches to ensure better nutrition and diets. Dr. Fanzo has a PhD in nutrition from the University of Arizona and completed a Stephen I. Morse postdoctoral fellowship in immunology in the Department of Molecular Medicine at Columbia University. With that, I also want to add that the admissions team is always excited to have her host these lectures because she's bringing such fascinating content to these lectures. So without any further delay, please welcome Dr. Jessica Fanzo. Jessica.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sidney, for the nice introduction. And thank you all for joining. For some of you, evening in the East Coast of the US, but hopefully we have people joining from all over the world. Really pleased to be able to give this talk for SAIS so you can just get a taste of some of the diversity of faculty and what we work on and the potential coursework. So I work in the space of food and food policy and food security, but of course we have many different topics that faculty work on and of course the coursework. So, things ranging from energy policy all the way to issues of international development, China and US relations, you name it, we have it at SAIS. So hopefully some of you will be able to tune in not only to my talk, but to other talks so you get a real flavor of the different types of topics that are available at SAIS. So I'm going to talk about can fixing dinner fix the planet? I think many of you know we are in the midst of significant climate change and disruption, and food plays a big role in climate. So today I'll first talk about the Anthropocene. We're in the era of the Anthropocene and what that means for food systems. and also what that means for our diets and for food insecurity around the world. How is climate change engaging and interacting with food systems to potentially threaten food security, and how are food systems in turn impacting climate change? And then we'll talk about some systemic issues that we need to deal with related to food, and what are some potential solutions as we move forward in these trying times. So first, the Anthropocene. What is it? It's a term that was actually coined in the 1970s by several scientists, but it's really taken on a true meaning. The Anthropocene is defined as Earth's most recent geological time period as being human influence. Never has there been a time where humans have had such overwhelming impacts on all Earth systems, be they biospheric, hydrological, geological. And if you look at this figure on the right, these Earth systems and Earth processes are changing. So on the top shows you the 3 greenhouse gas emissions: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, all increasing over the last several decades. But we see ocean acidification increasing, deforestation increasing, land use increasing, biodiversity degradation increasing. And what's important to see about these graphs is it's what's called the hockey stick approach, what Michael Mann, climate scientist, calls the hockey stick effect. Not only are they increasing, but it's the pace of change in the last decade, this increase that we see, this acceleration of climate breakdown. And a lot of that has to do with the way humans are living on the planet. There's many of us. You know, we have close to 8 billion people. The number of people living on the planet has more than doubled since I was born in 1971. So population pressure, but our intense energy use, our water use, transportation, telecommunications, urbanization, all of these human population pressures and the way we live our lives is having real impacts on the climate, which really can't be denied. So food systems are both victims and instigators of climate change. There's been a real call to change the way we produce food, the way we move food, the way we process and package food, the way we consume food. There's been many reports published in the last couple of years calling for grand transformations of food systems. And even more so, the links between food and the planet, planetary health and human health. These have been collectively been called for significant political changes to be made across climate, food, energy, and water. Now, I know this is quite a busy graph, but it is a depiction of food systems. So food systems are all the activities and actors in the way we produce food, move it, store it, package it, and get it to markets. So on the very far left are food supply chains. This is the entire supply chain from agriculture systems all the way to markets of foods being moved and manipulated around the world through trade, through local food systems and supply chains. It then hits what we call food environments. This is where you, as the consumer, engage with the food system. You walk into a market, you walk into a restaurant. You bring with yourself all of your own individual factors and values. How much do you want to pay? What's your purchasing power? What knowledge do you have at your disposal? What are your aspirations and desires? But these food environments are shaping your decisions as well. What kind of food is available? What's the price of the food? What's the packaging? What's the brand? Where is it positioned in the store? Think about in Trader Joe's when you're checking out, you see lots of candy in that waiting line that's done purposefully to sway your decisions to buy those salty, sugary snacks? What's the vendor like? Is it Whole Foods or is it a little corner store? The promotion and advertising, all of these food environment triggers are influencing your decisions of what you're going to buy and order. And these, of course, influence your diets, it influences your health and nutrition outcomes. It also influences the environment and economic outcomes of the food system. And along the top are all of these drivers outside the food system, exogenous to the food system, but significantly shaping them. Urbanization, population pressure, globalization and trade, climate, politics. All of these drivers are shaping food systems in positive and negative directions. Well, climate change is and will continue to have an impact on crop yields. This is a map of the world showing you in a 3-degree warmer world scenario, which we hope to never get to, the significant declines in crop yields shown in red, and the increase in crop yield shown in green. So if you want to be a farmer and grow lots of food, you're going to need to live in the northern territories of the world and in the next 50 years if the world keeps warming. But overall, when we look at the whole planet and the agriculture landscapes, climate change will have significant impacts on crop yields, and that being that those crop yields will decline. So we have a growing population, declining amount of food that can be grown. And there's estimates and models suggesting that extreme climate-related weather events such as heat waves, droughts, floods, fires we're seeing a lot of in the United States, cold spells will have significant impacts on major crop commodities like wheat, corn, soybean, rice. And there's models to suggest that these extreme weather events will co-occur on multiple large-scale cropping systems globally at the same time of what they call multiple breadbasket failures. So there's a high likelihood that we'll see some significant breadbasket failures that could potentially impact roughly 2 to 3 billion people at the same time, posing more food insecurity. We also see that the nutritional quality of crops are altered in what's called a CO2 fertilization effect. More greenhouse gases in the atmosphere create declines in the nutritional quality of certain crops, declines in zinc, iron, protein in crops like wheat, rice, soybeans, and maize. And this, so not only are the quantity of crops declining, but the nutritional quality of those crops are declining as well. Now, food systems are not just victims, they're also instigators of climate change. We use about 40% of the Earth's land to grow food. 40%, and it's stayed that way. Now there's extensification or moving out into new lands in some places like the Amazon in Central Africa, but largely that land the amount of land remains unchanged. But on that land, the agriculture systems emit about 25% greenhouse gases of total greenhouse gases emitted globally. So transportation and the energy sector contribute a significant amount of greenhouse gases, but the agriculture sector contributes about 25%. Some of that comes from cows through enteric fermentation, then belching. Their 4-chambered stomachs produce a lot of gas and in the form of methane, quite toxic greenhouse gas. But the whole agriculture system is contributing greenhouse gases. The fertilizers that we use, rice produces a lot of methane, manure produces methane. So there's a lot of other sources beyond just cows. And the other issue that we're now contending with is, as you all know, COVID. SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, infected people through a zoonotic spillover event, most likely from a bat, but although there's thoughts that maybe another animal was involved before it was transmitted to humans. Case traced back from the December outbreak in Wuhan, China, implicated a seafood wet market in China. Now, what's interesting about this or scary about this is that COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. It's a disease that jumps from animals to humans. Now, 60% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. And of that 60%, roughly 70% come from wildlife. Why is that? Well, food and agriculture have a big role to play in why that is. They are contributing to the rise in zoonotic disease because as we extensify agriculture, we're moving into natural habitats, and we've done that. And that shrinks the natural habitats or destroys natural habitats where wildlife live, putting us in closer proximity to wildlife. So this puts them at risk, it puts us at risk, and the risk of a spillover event becomes higher. So this COVID-19 is a canary in the coal mine. It's a warning. We've had pandemics in the past. There's been many, and we will continue to have them if we keep infringing on these habitats, putting wildlife in closer proximity to humans. So all of these stresses on the food system have implications on the foods we eat, our ability to be food secure, and our nutrition status. So I'm sorry, I'm depressing all of you, but there'll be some uplifting things at the end. Global malnutrition is a massive issue, and it's a universal issue. Not one country is immune to malnutrition. You think of the United States having a significant issue with overweight and obesity. You can think of some countries having still food insecurity, people going to bed hungry. Some countries are dealing with double, triple burdens of malnutrition, which make things very complicated. Now just look at some of these statistics on the left. 690 million people go to bed hungry every night, and that number is going to rise with COVID and the economic downturn. And that number's been rising for the last 3 or 4 years. You can see on the graph on the right. We're supposed to be going down, not up. About 140 million children are stunted, which is chronic undernutrition. These children are short for their age, but they're cognitively impaired as well. And there's a very small window of when you can interact and ensure that these children get on the right path towards development, about 2 years, the first 2 years of life. If you don't intervene, that window shuts, and these children become adults who can never thrive, don't reach their full potential. So 144 million children doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually 20% of the world's children under the age of 5 are stunted. And there's some countries, particularly countries of conflict like in the DRC, Afghanistan, where you see very high burdens of stunting. 50% of children are stunted. And if you look at that last figure, 2.1 billion adults are overweight or obese. That number is rising in every country. Not one country is immune to the rise in overweight and obesity. So we have this profound paradox. Why is the food system produced? Those here on the left, family living in Chad in a refugee camp, barely surviving, going to bed hungry every night, reliant on World Food Program, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, relying on their food aid, versus a family on the right in the US who has enough food, but it's not necessarily healthy food. A lot of highly processed packaged foods that are not necessarily healthy for well-being and sound nutritional status. So diets, these diets, whether they're not enough or they're suboptimal, have now become the top risk factor of disease and death in the world. Diets that are meant to nourish us are killing us now. More than tobacco smoke, more than air pollution, more than alcohol use, it's diets. And these diets are high in sodium, high in sugar, and low in whole grains, low in fruits, low in nuts and seeds and vegetables. So they're these suboptimal diets. And they contribute to about 11 million deaths every year. And even more so, what we really see a trend in, more and more of the diet that people are eating is made up of what they call highly processed or ultra processed foods. These are processed packaged foods that are tasty, convenient, and low cost, but very high in sodium, sugar, and unhealthy fats. And this is showing you the change in sales of these food and drinks, so sodas, potato chips, Cheetos, all that delicious stuff. Shown in blue is drinks and green is food. And it's showing you the change in those sales. You can see in most regions of the world, there's been an increase in sales of those foods. You see a decrease in North America, but that is because there is a decrease in those sales. But by just sheer volume, North America, Australia consume a lot of these foods. Up to something like 60% of the diet is made up of these foods on average. And the other issue with diets is that a healthy diet is unaffordable for a significant proportion of the world. About 65% of the world cannot afford a healthy diet. So if you look on the left, this is showing you the cost of just energy sufficient diet, just calories. Most of the world can consume that. But when you look at the poverty line, the global poverty line being over or less than $1.90 a day, a healthy diet costs more than $1.90 a day. So a significant proportion, particularly in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, just can't afford that healthy diet. So there's real inequities. And the diets that we're moving towards, the other trend is less sustainable. So when we think about the demands of diets, particularly animal source foods, as people get wealthier, they diversify, they consume more animal source foods. They're tasty, they have a lot of nutrients, but they do put stress on the environment. This is showing you 5 environmental metrics: greenhouse gases, land use, water use, nitrogen and phosphorus application. And the 2 bar graphs are showing you 2010, so present day, and 2050. It's showing you the food production of different food groups and the environmental stress put on those 5 environmental metrics. And if you look at just animal products shown in dark red, they put significant stress on greenhouse gas emissions. But if you look at the other food groups, they also contribute to environmental stress. Depends on where food is grown, how food is grown, by whom, can have different environmental footprints. So tomatoes grown in greenhouses have a big greenhouse gas emission. Almonds, big water footprint. Avocados, big water footprint. So depending on how and where food is grown, it can have big environmental footprints. If you look at the blue bars, those darker blue bars, those are staple grains: maize, rice, wheat. Now, they contribute quite significantly to environmental stress, but you have to remember that about 50 to 60% of staple grains grown around the world are fed to animals, which we then in turn consume. So animals do have quite a significant environmental footprint, with beef and lamb being the highest greenhouse gas emitters and environmental stressors, whereas chicken and fish less so. We also just have to deal in this context of food and climate and their relationship and changing demands of the world's population. We're urbanizing, we have more disposable income. We have these larger systemic issues to contend with. So when we think about how we're going to fix food systems, nothing will stand really on two legs in the current fractured and sclerotic global political enabling environment. So if we want food systems to function effectively, equitably, and sufficiently during the COVID pandemic and long after, the political environment needs to be one that embraces global cooperation and inclusion and minimizes political polarization and geopolitical competition, which is we're experiencing this in dramatic ways. And again, a great reason to come to SAIS, thinking about global order, world order, issues of multilateral cooperation, challenges like COVID pandemic or climate change, what I call we're all in this together kind of challenges, in that not one country is going to solve it. Every country needs to get on board to solve it. We need cooperation, but we're really in an interesting times right now. This is from the World Economic Forum, their annual global risk report, showing risks in these colored diamonds. So red is societal risks, green is environmental risks, blue is economic risks. And then the outer silver diamonds are trends. And the size of these diamonds is the number and strength of connections. And, we really are dealing with significant megatrends: nationalism, geopolitical shifts, polarizing societies, rising inequality, urbanization. All of these will shape the future, and it's up to the political economy, the way we cooperate, what direction these megatrends will go towards. So what can we do now that I've completely depressed you and you might not even want to go home and eat dinner tonight? You can do a lot. As an individual, we can do a lot. As a country, we can do a lot. As global citizens and working together. The first thing is to care and act now. We are in the middle of climate change, and it's going to require changes across all aspects of society. Now, just about every country in the world agrees with this, and they're concerned about this, and they're acting on climate change, with the exception of one. The United States has pulled out of the Paris Accord as of last week. We're the only country that has done that. The new president-elect Biden has vowed to get us back into the Paris Accord, which is important, being that the United States is the largest greenhouse gas emitter per capita. So we need our policymakers to care, we need individuals to care, and to make concerted actions in our daily lives, but also globally, we need strong political action. And I call it everything changes. It's not just climate change, it's everything change. We need to know who's feeding us. We are becoming urbanites. I love this quote by Ruth DeFries. She actually taught in my class today. She's a great scientist. She's a university professor at Columbia. In her book, she says, "Now we are transforming from farmers to urbanites. Our newest experiment to feed massive numbers of people from the work of a few is just beginning. The outcome is yet to be seen." The question is who is going to feed us if everyone is leaving rural places, main streets, to Wall Street? Everyone's going to urban centers. The average age of the world's farmer is 62. So who will feed us? Get to know who's feeding you. Participate, support them. It's hard to be a farmer. It's hard to work and grow food on a daily basis. So it's really important for us to continue to support our farmers, our fisher folk, pastoralists, all of those who work on producing food, ranchers, what have you. The third is we need to diversify our agriculture production systems. When you look over on the left, the types of foods we grow on the landscapes around the world have been incredibly homogenized. About 75% of the land growing food is growing about 10 to 12 crops. That's it. And we have thousands of different varieties of crops we can grow around the world. If you diversify, you reduce your risk of climate change, climate impacts, nutrition impacts. Diversifying is critical, but we've homogenized our agriculture systems. And a lot of that has to do with agriculture subsidy policies and what those subsidies fund. And what's happened is we've created a real mismatch of what we're actually producing in the world, which is that far pie graph, a lot of cereals and starches, oils and sugars, to what we should be eating, a more healthy diet, fruits and veg, some cereals and starches, animal source foods, a nice diverse diet. So what we produce is not aligned to what should be on our plate or in our bowl. We need to embrace technology, but with that comes conundrums. So we are at an unprecedented time where technology, innovation, big data is at an all-time high. We've got artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, genetically modified organisms, potential for lab-grown meats. The question is, of these technology options, will they be ethically permissible and acceptable to people? And what would be considered fair? How will these technologies be distributed in fair ways and in ways that do not infringe on people's rights? We need to improve diets, adopt technology on farms, and minimize food waste. This is from an Eat Lancet commission, a quite important commission that came out last year. And what it shows is those 5 environmental metrics again: greenhouse gases, land use, water use, nitrogen and phosphorus application. And it shows if you can make changes to diets, shown in green, more towards a flexitarian diet, more plant-based, not so intensively on meat and starches, the typical American diet, you can have a big impact on greenhouse gases, for example, that green bar on the far left. But the gray bar is showing you on-farm sustainable technologies available now can make a big impact on the environment across all of the metrics. And cutting food loss and waste in half, shown in yellow, can also make a big impact. The point is, we need multiple actions, multiple tools to ensure that we put less stress on the environment. And of those that work on research, if you come to SAIS, you'll meet lots of researchers, people working on research on policy, people working on research on just empirical evidence. You know, we're at a time when facts and evidence are under incredible scrutiny, often disregarded. But the rigors of science and evidence must be maintained. And I think many of you listened to Tony Fauci. He gave a great talk at Hopkins a couple weeks ago talking about how important research is in charting a positive direction for overall sustainable development. And it does bring wholesale changes in attitudes, political thought, and action. So while it seems like we are in dark days of misinformation and people undermining data and conspiracy theories, I think many of us who work in research and garnering evidence and data need to stay the course and realize how important evidence and data is in political decision making. And last, we need to take lessons from COVID. There's many learning lessons coming out of COVID in real time when we think about the food system. One is that we need to keep trade open and flowing, keep food systems stabilized. But that means that we need to protect food system workers. They need PPE, personal protective equipment. They need to be valued. They need fair wages. And they will be the backbone of keeping the food system moving, but we need to protect them and value them. We need to ensure that food supplies are safe and nutritious and equitable, particularly for the most marginalized and disadvantaged. We've seen that those who get infected with COVID tend to be marginalized often. They have significant health disparities. We need to ensure that their diets are healthy, that they get the support that they need. The third is that we need to govern the regulation of illegal sales of wildlife in the global food trade and food markets. The use of illegal sales of wildlife for food and fur need to be much more significantly regulated. We need to ensure that there's safety nets for those marginalized and disadvantaged populations, keep those food banks flowing and open during times of COVID and long after with the economic implications of COVID. We need to also consider a One Health approach, bringing those that work in health, those that work on animals, those that work on environment, ecosystems together in approaches, in synergistic approaches to solve these pandemic type problems. And we need to finance the global humanitarian response plan that's been put together by the UN. It's incredibly underfunded, but World Food Program is desperately needing to scale up their programs around the world to ensure that food assistance is delivered to those in most need during these times of the pandemic. And I'll end there, and I look forward to questions, and Sydney will be also here to answer questions about SAIS in general, and looking forward to hearing from you.
That was great, Jessica. Thank you so much. Really fascinating stuff. I mean, just a lot to take in the process. Kind of scary, but at the same time, I'm glad you're
Sorry about that.
You're ending on a high, being forward-looking. So thank you very much. We've got a number of questions that were posed to us in the chat box, and can we get Karen up? Yeah, so we get Karen. Karen Owen, our director of admissions, is going to facilitate the Q&A for you. So I'm going to pull off, and Karen, you want to take it from there?
Thank you, Sydney. And again, thank you, Dr. Fanzo. Very enlightening, and I hope very encouraging for all of you as well, because there's so many opportunities for us to impact change. Just want to encourage everyone in the audience. First of all, thank you for joining us. Please add questions in the Q&A box, and I will share them with Dr. Fanzo, and she will go ahead and help us answer these questions. For Dr. Fanzo, the first question we have is from Alex. Not ideal, but could reduction in food waste and technological advances in agriculture make up for potential yield losses from climate change? You're muted.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot that can be done on farm to mitigate against food loss. You know, a lot of food is lost during storage, during harvesting, during processing and packaging. So I had presented some of that data, Paul, that you know, on-farm reductions in food loss, as well as at the retail and at the household level, minimizing food waste can have big impacts on the environment. So absolutely. Particularly in places like Africa, South Asia, where they have significant food loss at the farm and less food waste at the household level. Absolutely.
And that speaks really nicely into the next question that Paul raises. So what farming methods would you recommend are efficient to produce food in the extreme event of climate change in Africa?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research showing that, interestingly, smallholder farmers, many living in Africa, many living in, you know, the whole southern tropics, produce a diversity of foods, and they actually supply about, there's estimates of about 56 to 81%, to be quite specific, of the nutrients in the food supply. So these smallholder farmers live on less than 2 hectares of land, but they produce a ton of nutrients because their food systems are very diverse. They grow lots of different foods. And there's been some calls recently that we need to invest and support in smallholders, ensuring that they get out of the poverty trap. And so this is a really important message that not only are smallholders the custodians of biodiversity on the planet, but they're still providing most of the nutrients to feed the world. So it's quite an important message that they need to be valued more.
Right. So Jadon asks, how do you allocate deaths to specific metrics of malnutrition? Example, excess sodium.
Not sure I understand the question completely, but I think maybe you're referring to the slide where I showed the 11 million deaths per year coming from suboptimal diets. That work comes from the Global Burden of Disease Project, which is a massive project out of the University of Washington led by Chris Murray. And that data is a lot of model data. It's a lot of estimated data. The modeling is quite complicated. But a lot of it comes from the literature of looking at a series of studies of significant diet attributes to morbidity and mortality. Maybe I'll stay. That could be like an hour. That could be like a whole class, Jane, of how these metrics are calculating global burden of disease. But I recommend you going to that Global Burden of Disease website. That they're the ones who calculate even the COVID deaths, looking out into the future. Somewhat controversial, but but being used widely.
So in what way, looking forward, in terms of sustainable food security, I guess in terms of survival of humanity, so I guess what ways can we look forward in terms of sustainable food security that will help us with
Yeah, I mean, I think I gave some examples, but I mean, we have to move towards more sustainable food production, right? We can only garner so much from the land how we're producing food, right? So we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about fish stocks. We're depleting the wildlife from the oceans. So thinking about things like aquaculture and how do you make aquaculture sustainable? How do we ensure sustainable feed for aquaculture? So I think we need to move much more towards what they call sustainable intensification. If we want to feed 8 to 10 billion people, how do we intensify food production in sustainable ways? And there's a lot of technologies out there to do that, through renewable energy resources, growing different diverse types of food, better feed for livestock, better feed for aquaculture. So it's possible to feed our world and do so in a sustainable way and ensure that ecosystems thrive as well. We can do it. It's a matter of political will and political commitment to take action on it. And that just often doesn't exist, unfortunately.
My goodness. So Paige asks, what are your thoughts on the implications of gene editing in agriculture, especially in terms of potential environmental impact or the ability to adapt to the challenges of climate change?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed story, Paige, with gene editing. Gene editing, has potentially really significant benefits. If we think about drought tolerant, wind tolerant type crops. So the potential to use that technology for more resilient crops in the face of extreme weather events could be important. But at the same time, some of these crops rely on certain herbicides and pesticides, which may have implications for those working on farms who are exposed to those as farm workers or laborers. as well as the environmental implications of those with biodiversity loss and pollinator loss. So there's pros and cons to these technologies, as is with any kind of technology. And this is where ethicists actually become quite important in weighing those trade-offs. And how do we create the most public health benefits and at the same time stave off the most significant harms? And sometimes it's hard to predict the harms, future harms, right? What will be potentially catastrophic. So gene editing is an area of incredible controversy, incredible ethical dilemmas, intractable, a lot of debate, because it has these positives, but potential significant harms, unintended, or even some unknown harms that worry governments, that worry people in a significant way. So it's a mixed story, to say the least. It's one of the most contentious issues in food systems is GMOs. Yeah.
Great. So Asma says, thank you for your time and insight, Dr. Fanzo. How may we balance long-term infrastructural change and the imperative of meeting immediate food insecurity exacerbated by COVID? I often wonder how the two can be maintained simultaneously, as opposed to resource disproportionately being allocated to one over the other.
I don't know what asthma means by infrastructural change, but yeah, I don't totally get the question, but
and Asma, feel free to jump in and further explain.
Yeah, maybe I need a little bit more.
Okay. We'll
Sorry.
go to the next question. Don't be sorry. Okay, so Connor says, to the extent there are foreign policies that can be designed to address these issues by the U.S., what do you prioritize?
Say again, Karen, will you repeat?
Of foreign policy. So to the extent there are foreign policies that can be designed to address these issues by the U.S., what do you prioritize?
I mean, to me, if I'm getting the question right, I mean, to me, the biggest priorities are for the world to sign on to the Paris Accord and fulfill those agreements. That to me is like the most significant overarching global policy that needs to take place. I mean, when you start to think about, why the US is so important in that is that US has a really important role because we are significant contributors to climate change, but also because we are still one of the biggest players in the food system. So I think aligning our US policies to those that meet the climate change accord policies will be critically important.
Okay, looks like I skipped a couple of questions. I will circle back. So one question that came up here by Benjamin, in 2013, 1 billion people were overweight and obese. And today, 2.1 billion people. It's clear, and it's been clear for years, that being overweight and obese is dangerous and unhealthy. Despite the knowledge, the problem has gotten only worse in the last decade. So what can we do differently in the coming decade to arrest this trend?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the obesity is rising everywhere, and where you see the most dramatic rise is in low and middle income countries. So what took the United States 40 or 50 years, that rise in overweight is happening in a much shorter time scale because of urbanization, demographic changes in lifestyle, and some biological issues around being born undernourished puts you at a higher propensity to be overweight and obese into adult life. But there's lots we can do in the food system. There's what you see a lot of is taxing of unhealthy foods and soda, right? That's one tool. Now, will that impact obesity is yet to be seen. It does impact purchases of those foods in some countries like Mexico and Chile and South Africa and other countries who've had this tax. But we need to do a lot more. We need to fix those food environments that I referred to, ensuring that the choice architecture, the architecture of these food environments make it easier for people to make healthier choices. Healthy food needs to be more affordable. We need better designed cities that promote us to be able to walk around, green space, safe environments where women aren't afraid to go out and exercise and get some physical activity. So there needs to be, again, this kind of multi-prong approach of providing healthy food that's affordable, particularly in poor neighborhoods where it's hard to find healthy foods, these food desert areas, but also ensuring these urban scapes are promoting healthy lifestyles, promoting people to be able to take in some physical activity, particularly right now with COVID. We need to be able to walk around and actually breathe some fresh air, right? Mm-hmm. But, just to Benjamin's comment, there's a real lack of evidence of how to prevent overweight and obesity. There's not a lot of evidence of how to do it. The trend just is alarming to see at the very least, but yeah.
Interesting. So then Rose asks, what's the role of pesticides in food insecurity? And food security, actually.
And pesticides are important in keeping crops thriving. Pests will eat at crops. I mean, we're seeing locust infestations in Africa right now. You see armyworm in Africa happening. So the pesticides, if anyone has ever tried to grow food, pesticides can be lifesavers as far as keeping crops thriving and not being consumed by some sort of insect or pest. But with that comes a series of harms to labor workers, etc. But pesticides are critically important in places like the tropics where, you have a lot of unpredictable pests that can destroy crops. But, there's more sustainable pesticides out there. There's something called IPM, integrated pest management, which is a much more sustainable way to use pesticides in a much more controlled precision type way. So.
Okay, we have Ranan asks, I've been to Navdanya, a biodiversity farm in northern India. Mm-hmm. They advocate seed freedom and set up a seed bank. Do you think that save seeds and save food are the same thing?
I think seed saving programs are critically important, particularly to protect that biodiversity of our food landscape overall. So, I mean, Runan, I think saving seed, heirloom seeds, the different varieties of seeds is the starting point for a diverse food system. And if we don't have those seeds, we won't have the diversity of foods that we can grow on the planet. And, maybe some of you know about the Svalbard seed vault, what's called the apocalyptic vault. It's a vault that sits up in Norway in the mountain that's trying to save seeds from all over the world. It's called the apocalyptic vault because if something ever happens to humanity, we'll at least have all the seeds from the major crops that we grow around the world. So it's incredibly important. As someone who used to work at Biodiversity International, I worked there in Rome, and it's all about the importance of the biodiversity of seeds, and that being the starting point for the importance of a diverse food basket around the world.
To add to that, in your experience, how easy has it been to convince governments to minimize import substitutions in raw and agricultural commodities?
Well, that gets into trade issues, and trade is a really complicated space. The WTO really monitors that, and it's very politicized. So, and, governments often use trade as a way to manipulate or control, government relations. So I think it's convincing governments to minimize import substitutions. If you think about India and China, or other countries that are not as powerful, like the Pacific Islands, they fought against the World Trade Organization from importing meat byproducts into their country, turkey tails and mutton flaps, these canned meats. They fought against the WTO and put tariffs on those foods coming into their country. So. But it's quite a battle when you get into WTO negotiations.
Great. We have a lot of great questions. I'm going to try to jump around and get a couple down at the bottom. Leanne asks, how do you account for cultural ties to certain kinds of food? For example, a culture that consumes a lot of fish, or a culture that consumes a lot of rice, when it comes to creating and enacting global policies to combat climate change?
Great question. Yeah. And there's cultures that eat a lot of meat, right? There's certain cultures that eat lots of meat, and so they probably have a quite environmentally heavy footprint. So yeah, that's a big conundrum, is how do we move towards a more plant-based diet that's more climate friendly, but not infringe on cultural practices and traditions. So it's a trade-off issue, and in a lot of these big reports where you see them promoting plant-based diets, well, what does that mean for Mongolia? What does that mean for nomadic pastoralists in Kenya that eat a lot of meat? So where do we draw the line on infringing on social traditions, cultural traditions, and putting stark recommendations like high carbon food taxes on foods? It's a conundrum indeed. Yeah.
We'll take one last question, or we're wrapping up, maybe not. Sydney's jumping back on. So thank you, Dr. Fanzo, for answering all these great questions. And audience, you all had plenty of questions. We encourage you to please email the Office of Admissions. We'll be more than happy to follow up with all additional questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand it back over to Sydney.
Yeah, I just want to say Dr. Fanzo did a great job again. This is fascinating content. I'm sure you had so many questions we didn't even get to them. I apologize to you folks, but thank you everybody who's joined us from wherever part of the region of the world you're joining us from. But we're excited about hopefully seeing your application. If we'll have another taster lecture probably coming up in the spring for many of the applicants, you can look out for that. But there's a number of different opportunities to connect with the admissions team through other virtual events. So,
and Sydney, to all those who joined, you can always reach out to me as well if you want to talk about
exactly.
food, or if any of you are interested in other areas of SAIS, Sydney, we can all link you up to the right people. But happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Yes, definitely. And we have a faculty directory online. You can find Dr. Fanzo. It's very easy. Your email is there as well too. Thank you for bringing that up. But look, I appreciate everybody, logging in and joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure. Dr. Fanzo, thank you again. But again, we look forward to remaining in contact and engaging even further. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great evening, great morning, great afternoon, wherever you are. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.